Morning Answer continues next on AM 560. The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So we're doing a Trump redux with some of his pronouncements in the direction of Canada, Greenland, the Panama Canal, the Gulf of Mexico. Trump taking questions from reporters, restated his position on the canal that he's been discussing for, the better part of the last 4 weeks.
No, I can't assure you on either of those two, but I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift. It should have never been made, by the way. Giving the Panama Canal is why Jimmy Carter lost the election, in my opinion, more so maybe than the hostages. The hostages were a big deal. But if you remember, and nobody wants to talk about the Panama Canal now because, it's inappropriate, I guess, but because it's a bad part of the Carter legacy. But he was a good man. Look, he was a good man. I knew him a little bit, and he was a very fine person, but that was a big mistake. Giving the Panama Canal to Panama was a very big mistake. We lost 38,000 people. It cost us the equivalent of $1 trillion, maybe more than that. Probably the most expensive, they say it was the most expensive structure, if we call it a structure, which I guess you can, ever built. And giving that away was a horrible thing. And I believe that's why Jimmy Carter lost the election, even more so than the hostages. Those two things.
Well, the hostages, how about the malaise of the Carter years? That was probably the overriding factor in 80, I should say. But setting aside his interpretation of the 1980 presidential results, the Panama Canal, as we talked about before, we talked about with Steve Bucci from the Heritage Foundation, a lot of this is directed at, the saber rattling is directed at China in part, although they're not formally managing the canal or controlling the canal, but the Hong Kong company that controls the port. Trump has talked more specifically before about our military access and the canal fees, both for public and private, probably going in that direction, probably not doing a Falkland Islands play here. But, of course, you have D.C. press corps hair on fire their own volition with the idea that we're going to go to war over Trump's perspective on the Panama Canal or Greenland. Although my most, or Canada, which is just complete trolling, but the most important announcement to me personally.
What? Oh, yeah, this is because it hits home for you.
Well, right. So my house in Naples is on a finger channel that leads right out to the Gulf of America. And if I could call it the Gulf of America, I'd probably bump my property value another 20%.
We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name. And it's appropriate. It's appropriate.
So that's not trolling at all, right? I mean, he really, Democrats change the name of things all the time. Columbus Day, now Indigenous Peoples Day. Lakeshore Drive is now DuSable Lakeshore Drive. I mean, it's been done.
Yeah, I thought the funniest response was from Mexican President Sheinbaum saying,
"What?
Well, we'll rename America, Mexican America." And she went back to make her case historically. And she said the Gulf of Mexico has been established, and it's a recognized name by the UN. Oh, the UN!
No, not them.
Oh, isn't that darling? For more on this and other matters, please be joined by Wisconsin Senator, Republican Ron Johnson. Senator Johnson, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Morning, guys. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing better now that that Gulf of Mexico could be the Gulf of America right in my backyard. That's That is a positive development. But your serious take on some of these matters that are generating all of this heat?
Well, first of all, I think President Trump is just laying out how vital the Panama Canal and, quite honestly, Greenland could be to our national security. As you see Russia and China move to try and dominate the Arctic, we have very important national security interests in making sure that they don't control that.
Right.
The same thing with the Panama Canal. I mean, that was one of the stupidest moves by an American president to give the Panama Canal away. So, I mean, President Trump's absolutely right on that. I will say, of any president in my lifetime, I think President Trump was and is the most unlikely to get us into another war. This, I'm sure, is kind of his art of the deal. I do not fear Trump moving us into endless or useless wars. I think he's a very anti-war individual, and that's one of the reasons I support him. The story I tell is the one when I ran down one of our drones and everybody was beating the drums of war. You have to retaliate. It was President Trump who, just right on the brink of retaliating, said, "Hey, how much did that drone cost?" I think it's a couple $1 million. He said, "How many people are going to lose their lives? A few hundred." Yeah, I don't think that is worth the loss of that kind of life. And he pulled them back. Again, that's who he is. He does not want wars. So, again, if people haven't figured this out about Trump, is he'll bang the table, he'll bluster, but it's kind of who he is in terms of how he goes about bargaining and getting what he wants.
Well, right, and on Greenland, just to put a fine point on it, you mentioned it with respect to it's an independent territory of Denmark, and it is mineral rich, and we do have concerns about Russia and China and influence in the Arctic, as you said, and the reaction to Trump's rattling the cage of the Danes is that Frederick X is devoting more security resources to Greenland. Now, if we can cut the deal that William Seward wanted to cut and acquire Greenland, okay. But if we can't, at least we have, very much like NATO, with him rattling the cage of NATO, hey, you got to pay your fair share. We have Denmark starting to pay a little bit more attention, as they should.
Yeah, precisely. So again, President Trump is absolutely correct in pointing out these are some regions of vital American national interest. This has been our sphere of influence. Look at what China's doing in the South China Sea. Look at what Russia's doing. So again, rather than continue to be in decline, which is what America has been under Joe Biden, again, we're trying to build America back up again, protect our vital interests. That's not a bad thing.
And on Canada, the Wall Street Journal says, he's all this 51st state business and so forth. He's jeopardizing Polyev and the Conservatives' electoral prospects. And I actually think it's quite the opposite. It gives Polyev the opportunity to say, well, of course, we're not going to be ceding any national sovereignty or territory to America, but this is an opportunity to have someone who can talk to Trump and perform a closer economic union between the two countries in the interest of lowering prices on consumer goods for Canadians and Americans alike. Seems to me like a perfect opportunity he's setting up.
Well, President Trump has a sense of humor. I know the left doesn't, but yeah. President Trump does. I'd say conservatives in general have we do have a sense of humor. But again, by doing this, he's pointing out interesting facts, and that's not a bad thing. So again, I don't think we're going to go to war over either Panama, Greenland, or Canada. But it's true that Canada is not protecting the northern border. They are letting people into this country by not protecting it well. So again, there's some real issues need to be discussed between Canada and the United States. I love Canada. I love Canadians. I think they're incredibly nice people. I go up there. I pull walleyes out of their pristine water woods.
Yeah.
So again, this is just the mainstream media. They're just so easily triggered. I mean, they just so hate Donald Trump that they want to blow anything he says up and make it into some major issue when it's not.
Well, speaking of Canada, what was your reaction when Justin Trudeau said that he's going to resign? Any surprise there?
No, I couldn't be happier. What he did during COVID was probably as egregious as any world leader in terms of the lack of freedom. What he did to the truckers up there. Again, just a complete tyrant, a totalitarian. And it's amazing Canadians put up with him as long as they did.
I wanted to, don't forget the deep banking, too.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
he was sort of at
seized
the
their
tip
bank
of the
accounts.
spear with respect to that. No, he's, don't make grade school drama teachers your prime ministers. Canadians had to learn the hard way. The piece you wrote in the Wall Street Journal around the turn of the calendar about spending and the desire that you have to go back to pre-pandemic spending levels adjusted for population growth and inflation, sort of a Tabor in reverse, if you will. But the prospect of spending restraint, particularly in the House, given the slim majority, how optimistic are you that there can be real reductions in the size and speed of the spend?
At this moment, I'm quite optimistic because my concept is really gaining traction. We had a good meeting last night with I won't say who's, but I mean, we had chairman of Senate committees, we had key members of the House, and they're basically embracing the concept, which is first and foremost understanding how much the federal government spends. I found that out 3 years ago, and I asked my colleagues, anybody know how much we spent last year in total? And nobody raised their hands. I went up to the Washington Press. Anybody know? And said, well, it was over $1 trillion. No, that's just discretionary. I mean, in total. The answer was $6.5 trillion. And so, first of all, Americans and people here in Washington have to understand that we went from $4.4 trillion of spending in 2019, $4.4 trillion to $6.6 the next year during the pandemic. We've averaged for the last 5 years $6.5 trillion. This year, President Biden, his budget was for $7.3. This is absurd. It's 50% higher than we were just 5 years ago. The analogy I use is, let's say you have a family, somebody gets sick, the family makes $100,000, but now they have to spend an additional $50,000 on medical bills. The person gets well, the next year, wouldn't you just go back to a $100,000 budget? No. The federal government, we're continuing to spend $150,000 and borrowing all the money. So again, only the federal government. States have to balance their budget. Families have to balance their budget. Businesses have to balance their budget. Only the federal government doesn't feel like it has to. So we are on this massive spending spree, further mortgaging our children's future. So it's just common sense. So I've laid out a couple scenarios. If we go back, for example, in 1898, which is the first year we had a surplus since before 1969, and just increase spending by inflation and population, leave in place Biden's Social Security, Medicare, and interest budgets, we'd be spending $5.5 trillion this year. We'd have a balanced budget. Yeah, I don't think we spent too little under Bill Clinton in 1998. If you do it with Obama in 2014, we'd be spending $6.2 trillion. It's kind of like take your pick, but we have to reduce the baseline spending level to some pre-pandemic level or some pre-pandemic year, and put this nation back on a sustainable course. Federal government this year will consume about 25% of our GDP. That's historically very high. You know, we've been spending probably 21% for decades. We need to get to at least 21%.
What's the Senate Republican caucus's real view of DOGE? I assume it's probably uneven, considering you had 20 senators vote for Biden's infrastructure bill, 20 Republican senators. So, but you know, is DOGE really going to be an ally in this fight to restrain spending, or is it going to be an ally of some and not other members of the caucus?
Well, so I hope everybody's intrigued. I certainly am. I read Walter Isaacson's book on Elon, and you know, the guy is obviously an engineer genius. I loved his concept of the idiot index. You know, take a look at the raw materials of a product. You know, what's the final cost, and the differences. You know, shows you how much you're being overcharged, or what you can really do in terms of cost cutting. So, I mean, they're obviously highly talented individuals. They're going to come up against the realities of what we actually can do in government. But again, from my standpoint, what I'm trying to drive is a budget process where we actually agree on, okay, we're not going to spend any more than X. And I'm thinking somewhere in the $5.5 to $6 billion level versus the over $7 trillion we're spending now. So establish that baseline, and then ask the committees, figure out how to prioritize spending underneath that. Use Elon and Vivek in terms of their ideas, in terms of how you can shrink government, how you can become more efficient. So I just view them as just a really great consulting firm. But again, unfortunately, we're going to have to live within the constraints of what laws we've already passed in terms of what we can do. But I think most people are very intrigued and very open to what they're going to come up with.
Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson. Senator Johnson, thank you as always for your time. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.